Hello and good afternoon, TVI viewers. Welcome to CrossRoads with Neethan Shan. As you know, CrossRoads is a weekly talk show dedicated to discussing a variety of topics that are relevant to the social, economic, political, and cultural advancement of Tamil Canadians. March has become a crucial, critical month in our calendar for Tamils doing human rights advocacy work. Many activists make a trip to Geneva or pay great attention to what's happening in Geneva during this time, hoping that we will get justice of some sort through this process. So in today's episode, we will be discussing Geneva, the processes related to it, genocide-related resolution that passed in Northern Provincial Council, changing political landscape in Sri Lanka, and many other related topics. To discuss these critical topics with us, we have three special guests doing important work in these areas. First, I'll introduce Dharsha. Dharsha Jegatheeswaran is a third-year law student at the University of Toronto. For the past year, she has been part of CTC's human rights team working on international advocacy for human rights, particularly Tamils' rights. And prior to that, you had worked in Sri Lanka as well, looking at grassroots organizations, and also had your internship done in Center for Policy Alternatives.
Yeah.
So what's called? Okay. Thank you very much for coming and joining us in the show.
Thank you for having me.
And next special guest is no stranger to us, Mrs. Usha Sriskandarajah. She is in the Senate of TGTE, the Transnational Government of Tamil Eelam, and she's a writer. We've seen many of her work published in various journals and so on. So your work on the human rights activism has been phenomenal. So thank you very much for taking the time to be part of this show.
Thank you, Neethan. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. And again, no stranger to many of us, an active member of the Canadian Tamil community, but prior to that he was a member of parliament from Eelam, and has been also a member of parliament for Transnational Government of Tamil Eelam, Mr. Eelaventhan, who has graced us. Thank you very much, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you for giving an opportunity to share our thoughts on all crucial issues.
Thank you. So this is going to be a lot of topics, as I mentioned in my introduction, but it's timely because unfortunately or fortunately, there's always a lot of focus during March. And I say unfortunately because it seems like the other months are less important somehow than March. But because of what's happening in Geneva and the kind of focus after the armed struggle, the role of armed struggle has been reduced or become non-existent, the attention of the international Tamil human rights activists has been on Geneva. And Dharsha, you have been to Geneva a couple of times. And just in the whole process, are we paying too much attention, too many resources put in, or are we paying less attention, or are we at the right balance? Is progress being made through the channels that we have in Geneva? Just an evaluation of what's happening.
So I think that what we're doing in Geneva is really working within the international human rights framework, and specifically within the UN Human Rights Council. And I think that there is a due reason to pay attention to the Human Rights Council and work within that framework, because if we look back to 2009, Sri Lanka, after the war ended, was easily able to pass a resolution that congratulated them on the end to a war on terror, with no opposition, no mention of the atrocities that occurred at the end of the war or the considerations of ongoing human rights violations. So if we fast forward now, 6 years later, after Tamil rights activists and organizations have been focusing on Geneva and working in that context, we see a dramatic shift in international opinion on Sri Lanka and the intensification of international pressure on Sri Lanka. Because I think that what we all sort of accept is any resolution or any potential solution for Tamils in Sri Lanka at this point in time will rest from outside of Sri Lanka or external to Sri Lanka, that there isn't the political will or even capability of the Sri Lankan government to properly or meaningfully address the issues of Tamils in Sri Lanka and Tamil rights. So I definitely think that there are valid reasons to focus on Geneva, and I hope that we continue to raise international pressure for that reason.
Your take on this?
Well, I think Geneva is very relevant because we finally achieved an international investigation, an independent investigation. Although the TGTE is a bit disappointed that there has been a deferment of the release of the OISL report, we still feel we have faith in the High Commissioner for Human Rights, faith in the US which initiated the resolution, and so we are hoping that finally it will be released in September and it will be acted upon, and those responsible for genocide, Tamil genocide, will be prosecuted. And so we are looking to September with a lot of hope.
So the question remains the importance of Geneva. Even the ones who say it's not as great as where it should be are still paying too much attention to it and also still attending and being part of the process because it's relevant. But the question is, are the other alternatives being left out because there's so much focus on this? Are there any other alternative ways of bringing justice?
Yes,
or is UN the only primary mechanism? And then we'll get into the report and the delay of the report, because that is very critical in terms of how we see this process.
I think you have given me some idea of what the organization that I represent. I use the word transnational government is transparent. It believes in a democratic procedure and determined to win over world opinion by convincing, converting, failing that which is neutralizing. In that context, Geneva comes to the picture. We have indirectly hint whether this alone will deliver the goods. We say we have to deliver the child called Eelam. Nobody else can do it. But we can expect world organizations to come to our rescue by performing the function of a midwife to lessen the pain and agony during the birth pangs. But we are all conscious whether Geneva will live up to expectation, the geopolitical interests. America playing our part, India have its own. All those things are worrying us. But we can't lose faith. The day we lose faith, we'll have to commit suicide. So conscious of all the repercussions, the inside thinking, or call it geopolitical interest. So we have to do our part. Yeah, but Geneva, as he has put it very well, it has helped us to internationalize issue. That is a must. If we don't international issue, who is to care for us? But our part we have to play. It is at home the part we play. At home means the Tamils as a whole, whether be in Eelam or in Canada, we are 400,000 people here, do have to play a part. And India, as you put it, 8 million and 55,000 square miles, double the size of Sri Lanka. So the impact of Tamil Nadu in Delhi will bring the desired effect.
We'll definitely talk about the role of
Yes.
India at a later stage in the program. Coming back to your reservation, but being hopeful about the delay.
Yes.
Let's talk a bit more, because many hundreds of people, if not more, have put faith and trust and come out of zones of intimidation to provide their stories and their testimonials, and
Definitely.
and courageously done that. Once again, Tamils have continued to do
Yes.
that. And the delay kind of signals, to some people at least, that this might be a kind of a flipping back to an internal mechanism, or this might be a political interference, or is it just merely extended period to collect more information to make this report stronger, right? So the skepticism comes from past histories, and so what is, can you elaborate on where you think this would go?
Well, you know, we don't have any faith at all in a domestic investigation, because Sri Lanka's record in that department has been dismal, because you know they've had 20 commissions which have the performance record has been, you know, very bad. So for one thing, the president himself is biased, more or less.
As part of the
you
previous
know,
regime, right?
Definitely, he was the acting defense secretary during the height of the war, and he has said that he will not allow UN investigators in, and also he has said, although we will refer to the report. Now that's a question that, you know, I'm not sure what he meant by that, because if the report has not been released, does that mean that Sri Lanka is being given the report unofficially? That's a worrying thing for us. And the other thing is that Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe, the Prime Minister, has refuted the casualty figures. The present army commander was the chairman who actually had this so-called army investigation which exonerated all the members of the Sri Lankan armed forces. And then, you know, even I'm not sure whether there is a guarantee that the witnesses will come forward. Of course, the witnesses who were actually relatives of the disappeared came forward. But I'm not sure whether witnesses of the genocide will come forward in an internal domestic investigation. So we don't have any faith in the domestic investigation. So and also it will be finally, if they release a report, it will be a flawed report for sure, you know, and because they have rejected the evidence from the no-fire zone documentary as well, and so you know, where experts have found a lot of the evidence authentic in the no-fire zone documentary. So I'm really not sure how this will, you know, work out.
And as you said, you know, hope is the biggest weapon we have as a community. So that is that underlying theme, and you know, 6 months of waiting for it patiently is something that we might have to do. But
we might have to do.
Your take on this? You've been following this process as well. Bit of a surprise to some of us, but bit of an expected thing for others. So what do you think are the implications of it? First of all, is it justified to have a delay? In what cases would it be justified? And then what's the implication of this?
So I think the delay is undoubtedly a setback, and I think that many were disappointed by the delay, especially, as you've said already, victims and witnesses who came forward, who've already waited 6 years with no meaningful accountability or justice, but also took enormous risks, right, in talking to the High Commissioner's investigative team. So I think that my concern with the delay is that it was granted on the basis of signals of broader cooperation from the Sri Lankan government. And we haven't seen that come to fruition in the weeks since the delay was granted. Rather, what we've seen is President Sirisena going on BBC Sinhala and saying he wasn't going to allow in UN investigators, turning around to the Sri Lankan media and saying that the delay was a victory. So the spirit of the delay, I think, from the international community's perspective, really was this idea that they were putting faith in a new regime, that they thought potentially there was hope in the new regime. But I think as a Tamil rights activist and as someone, and as the Tamil community in Sri Lanka has made very clear, there is no faith in the new regime. There is no real difference in the new regime and when it comes to dealing with Tamil issues. So I think for me what's really important is that in the next 6 months, we hammer home the fact that there aren't any differences, that there shouldn't be time and space given to the new regime simply because they are a new regime. And further, there are pressing human rights concerns that need redress in the next 6 months and shouldn't be put to the side just because of the delay. Things like land grabs and the increased militarization, the fact that there are hundreds of political prisoners still in jail under the PTA. We saw the release of Jayakumari Balendran a week ago on bail, though, and we haven't seen any clarification of charges. There's no move to repeal the prescription, the indiscriminate ban on Tamil diaspora groups. These are all things that are pressing human rights concerns that need to be addressed in the span of the next 6 months, and I hope that despite the delay, we still see those human rights concerns addressed, and that the report in September is strengthened, or we leverage the delay to say, well, you gave Sri Lanka time and space and they've done nothing with it, which goes to prove the point we've been making that this is a structural and systemic issue.
But the report itself is about what happened in the past, right? It's not a report of solution of possible, you know, political solutions and so on to be consultating about future. It's about reporting what happened in the past, right? So a goodwill gesture is sometimes meaningless because how does this 6 month change what happened in the past? It can change what's going to happen in the future, but how does this 6 month period change what happened in the past? Because what we are expecting is the report is going to be hopefully not altered, right? Just because it's, you know, because maybe enhanced with more data, but not necessarily altered to kind of make an image or reputation related management for Sri Lanka. Again, you know, hopefully this September we will be able to see that. We're going to take a quick break at this point of time. but we will definitely talk about moving into.
I'd like to make a point
Quick shot,
as well, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, you know, what we are also interested is a forensic examination of the war zone to determine if there were banned weapons used, chemical weapons used. We want experts to go in there and examine skeletal remains, mass graves, and that sort of thing. You know, even though there is an internal investigation, I don't think Sri Lanka, in fact, which has covered up everything, would be willing to do. Yeah. So what's the point then in having a domestic investigation? Yeah. That is my question.
Yeah. And unlike, we're going to go into a break. We'll come back.
Change of faces or change of rulers doesn't change. Sinhalese continue to remain as leaders. They have inborn prejudice. They have preconceived notions. And I as an old man, I trace it not only in 1948 where Sri Lanka got so-called independence. We trace it back to the 1920s. There are two leaders who led the freedom movement for the country, whether it be Sirponnam Ramana, all have been cheated down.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the history of broken promises. Yeah.
But generous promises are made.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's where we are coming from. It's not an isolated 1 year of genocide that happened in the country that a new regime is trying to help us investigate. In some situation that's been the case, but this has been an ongoing situation. So coming back to taking a few minutes break for commercials, and we'll come back to discuss about genocide and the framing of genocide, which is very critical conversation to have. So viewers, stay tuned. We'll have a few minutes commercial break, and we'll meet again in a few minutes. Welcome back. You're watching CrossRoads with Neethan Shan. We're talking about Geneva, human rights advocacy for Tamils, and we have special guests who have been doing amazing work on the field here with us talking about this. So I'll start with Mr. Eelaventhan for the next question. You're familiar with politics in Eelam. You were a politician back home. So in the current context, recently Northern Provincial Council, Chief Minister, and the Northern Provincial Council itself passed a resolution that indicates, what has happened to Tamils as termed as genocide. For a number of years, when genocide-related advocacy happened in the diaspora, some folks were saying, this terming could be adversely impacting the people in Northern East, and now it's coming from a democratically elected government there. So, what's the implication of this resolution? The implication of continuing to use genocide as the way to identify what happened to us?
Your question is with a lot of potentialities and also pregnant with meaning, I'll use it. Because C.V. Vignesan, I know him personally, he's a gentleman of the first order, there's no question about it. But he being in Colombo, cut away from the people, could not think of identifying with the people and find a solution problem. Not that he was lacking in sincerity. But I see a sea change in his thinking. This resolution to me is a bloodless revolution performed by Chief Justice. And as a judge, he has given the verdict. I don't think anybody can go back on it. And that has brought in, kind of a change in the entire world. I use the word sea change, not only in his thinking. So people now feel confident. Man at the grassroots level, with an academic background, with a legal background, when he spells out things of this nature, it will carry weight. And many of the UN officials and others, whether they like it or not, they are forced to go and meet him and discuss everything. Yeah. Even if there is a disagreement, they dare not say it, because the way he presents it, he said, for love of words, you are not prepared to lose a case. So very lucidly he puts across. And when there was a part played by the American, they were trying to delay it, he questioned it and said, no, you are wrong. When the Norwegian team went also, he said with all politeness, he said, no, this is not the way of thinking. We are nothing against the Sinhalese, made it very clear. We are only recording events and warning our people and telling the world, this is where we are. If we are not going to act with the courage of conviction, we will say, in Tamil, intellectual assertion we say. So that he possesses at this most critical, he is a leader in crisis, I will call it. And that has changed the entire world. and we hope this will be sustained.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, the team in the TNA are not living up to expectations. But I don't want to be too critical.
We will talk about talk about TNA and the Tamil leadership and so on in possibly, because that is itself is a very big topic. But we'll stick in the themes around genocide. So is this debate? Debate is good in our community, but the debate about whether to call it genocide or not is not based on principle. It's more around strategy. That some people say strategically we should avoid this, right? Is it an unwarranted debate, or is it something that you
think? Of course not. It's the absolute truth. That's what happened. And since independence, successive Sri Lankan governments, majoritarian Sinhala governments, have been legislating, have implemented policy to actually virtually destroy the Tamil identity, slowly but surely, and they are succeeding, in fact. And going back to the genocide resolution passed by the Northern Provincial Council, I'm really proud of the members of the Northern Provincial Council, because I salute them for their courageous stand, definitely. And Justice Jegatheeswaran, the Chief Minister, is like a breath of fresh air, I would say, and he has articulated our case very, very well. Even the Tamil national question and so on, because under the 6th Amendment there are certain limitations, but within those limitations he has come up with fantastic explanations about two nations, one country, and then he recently has sort of like an advice to Mr. Modi, has asked that Mr. Modi talk to the hosts about a dynamic power sharing and not talk about the 13th Amendment. So I think Mr. Jegatheeswaran really is very encouraging, and we like what he's doing.
Okay. All right. So that is important, because I know there was skepticism in the early stages from many, and if it's proven leadership now, the unknown name,
Definitely.
and now you have a bit of a our previous struggles have earned the respect through process and through sacrifices, right? So, and I think that's what we're at. You're a law student, and sometimes the legal framework is what's often used as a way to say we shouldn't use these terms because it's legally defined in certain ways, right? And understandingly, law is created. It's human created, mostly man created.
I thought it's discovered. It's already there.
It's already so it's contextualizing that from your perspective. What do you think about the genocide-related resolution? But also, there are other parts to the resolution. What are the implications of the other parts to the resolution? Because it's also asserting the autonomy to a certain extent of the Tamil nation through that resolution.
So I think addressing the first part of your question, I think the debate about the use of the word genocide does sort of highlight for me, as a law student, the tension between working within an international human rights framework that tends to be overly legalistic and hesitant about terming something before it's been legally proven, versus the need to actually give voice and articulate the lived experiences of people who have gone through these kinds of atrocities. And I think for me the NPC resolution is very powerful and great for two reasons. First, it talks about the structural issues when it comes to the oppression of Tamils in Sri Lanka and the rights involved and the necessity to address those structures of governance. And then secondly, I think that it's a really strong signal from the NPC to the Sri Lankan government that they're tired of waiting and that they're tired of the lack of negotiation at the table, the lack of traction that they're getting in speaking to the Sri Lankan government. And I know the counter-argument against the resolution has been, well, it's only been a few months, give it time, give them space. But I think what the NPC is saying in this resolution is that we aren't going to do that. After 6 years of waiting and 60 years of oppression, we're not going to wait, and we're not going to be afraid to talk directly to the international community and make clear that this is what happened to us, and we are demanding justice and accountability for it. So I thought that it was commendable for those reasons.
Yeah, definitely. So
if I may just add, you see, the TGTE has obtained expert legal advice from an eminent lawyer, Jeffrey Robertson, and also from Francis Boyle before that. And they said the question of genocide has to be litigated. It's a legal issue, no doubt, but it has to be litigated. And you know, the Sri Lankan government, of course, genocide, I think all the elements of genocide can be satisfied, though some people think, you know, genocide is something difficult to prove, because it's mainly based on intention. And intention, of course, you know, because here they targeted hospitals, they deprived people of food, medicine, medical aid, they lured them into no-fire zones, and then knowingly, indiscriminately targeted the civilians there, you know, young children, the future generation, the future Tamil generation. That is actually intending to destroy a group based on ethnicity, definitely. And so, you know, there is no question of genocide as far as we are concerned.
But the ability, whether it could be proven or not, would not determine how we explain our lived experience as a community as well, right? So it's a dichotomy, like you said. You know, we should be able to have the narrative within our community where we are
not only
freely
narrative
able to
and finally litigate. That's what we want.
I think he started very well on the question of 6 years and 60 years.
Yes.
As a whole man. So we have experienced the 6 years period and 60 years period. So where we have made, and we were somewhat deeply pained for the new High Commissioner for us to have given us hope at the start, given us a lot of hope. See, we thought he's going to even outbeat Namanidapura. But finally, when he said the 6 months period, that really upset us. But again, he said this is going to be the last move, and we will not change it. So that again, there's some hope.
So I'm going to come to this this concept of hope. Recent election, obviously Mahinda became a symbol of the final stages of genocide, and there was definitely a kind of a reaction, a positive reaction when he had been ousted from the power. But you know, to receive congratulatory messages about this new president and give so much hope into this process from Tamil community, I'm not saying generally, but there were circles of places where it came from, including, you know, encouraging the Canadian government to take the similar stand, the Canadian political parties to take a similar stand. Is this hope founded in any form of evidence or any form of reality, or is it just let's give it a try type thing? Is this going to be in a longer term creating a smokescreen or kind of false sense of security?
That's the word I want to use.
We want to be okay. So let's talk a bit about it, because I want to be fair as well. From the point of view, some would argue that we are at a weak stage in terms of bargaining for rights. We cannot be, you know, I don't want to say the beggars cannot be choosers, but that's kind of sometimes the attitude where we have not been in a strength position to bargain. So there's a possible avenue for us to kind of advance things. So should we be appeasing and praising and in fact congratulating and doing all those things, or should we continue on assuming that we have an international strength that we should be pushing it from?
You know, Mr. Sirisena, he became president almost on the back of the Tamil vote, without any conditions attached. And so far, I don't see anything from whatever he has said or his actions so far that he has moved towards, you know, in any way satisfying some of our concerns so far. So in that sense, I really I really don't know what he is going to do after the parliamentary elections, because now he must be soft pedaling, because not to, you know, in any way disrupt or the elections, upset the Sinhala people, and so on. So I don't know whether you know, he has had any deals with the Tamil parties, for instance, or promised them something and which he will deliver after the elections. I'm not sure, but so far he hasn't acted in any way that is going to give us any hope.
But then is it safer for us to be communicating outward a cautious optimism than a blind optimism, right? There's a difference between two, right? How do we measure our optimism in such a way that it doesn't give a sense to international community, particularly, when Canadian government representatives are coming to our stages, they are talking as if, the problem is now resolved, right? And the kind of attitude they're portraying.
Yeah.
So can we get a sense of what you think on this?
Yeah, so I think the organizations that have come out and said that there is an opportunity to be had with the new regime are not necessarily doing so with blind optimism, or at least that's not the read that I get. I think it very much is about cautious optimism, and I agree. Like, I don't think that there's been any change when it comes to concrete issues on the ground with respect to Tamils. But I think there is one key difference, and a key difference that certain organizations are trying to use in terms of advocacy, which is that the new regime, mostly because of Ranil Wickremesinghe, is Western facing, and they're trying to repair their relations with both the West and India and face away from China. And I know we're going to talk a bit more about that later, but I think where that gives room for Tamil rights activists and Tamil organizations is if they're trying to repair those relations, there's forms of advocacy we can engage in with national governments to condition their relations. So I don't think that the new regime really, there's much hope to be had in terms of changing concrete issues on the ground. But I think that if we take the fact that the new regime does care about international opinion, with the fact that there is currently international pressure and scrutiny, and if we maintain that international pressure, I think that's sort of where you can find cautious optimism going forward, and how we should structure our relations.
So final on this particular topic, and then we'll take a break.
You gave us a good idea and followed it up. Often
I'm not giving ideas.
No,
I'm just asking questions on
anyway,
both sides
it's
too.
food for talking.
But yeah.
So we use the word. Often I am charged that I am a prophet of gloom, or that I am a pessimist. I often use the word. I believe in cautious optimism, because once bitten, twice shy. We have been bitten several times for several years, continuously. Still, we want to say that we can pin faith in X, Y, or Z is a worse form of self-deception. Therefore, and when the question of genocide comes in, it's not the killing. She put it well, the intention of killing, and how they wiped out the entire people. Quoting the Mannar Bishop, it's 1,46,000. Widows are over 1,00,000. Orphans are nearly 1,00,000. So like that, if we go on adding the figures, and there's no sign, as he puts it, of any change of heart. Forget about Eelam, forget about the other issues. Immediate issues of land, missing persons, so-called
prisoners of war.
Nothing is done. And for us to go on saying that this man is a nice man, I don't know how do we, at least we must have political foresight, able to foresee events. And that we should do it based on what has already happened. So that's where to me is nothing less than genocide. There's no, I am not a legal luminary or anything, but for all what we have experienced and all what we have. Now we say about the genocide, they say 8 stages of genocide.
We're going to quickly take a break.
So genocide is a process that develops in 8 stages that are predictable but not inexorable. At each stage, preventive measures can stop it. The later stages must be preceded by earlier stages, though earlier stages continue to operate throughout the process. Classification, symbolization, dehumanization, organization, polarization, preparation, extermination, and denial.
And I think we got enough evidence, not just also lived experience that can direct ourselves to say that's there. But at this point, I think we have a critical conversation to have about the role of India and the role of diaspora, because those two are key players in our solution. So we're going to take a few minutes commercial break, and when we come back, we will be talking about the role of India as well as the diaspora. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching Crossroads with Neethan Shan. We are talking particularly about Geneva human rights violations against Tamils and the justice that's being sought. But in addition to that, talking about political solution, genocide, and other related concepts that we are dealing with at this point. So, India's role becomes a critical part of a solution. India has always been, whether we like it or not, has been a keen country, paying so much attention to what's happening. And the regime change in India, the recent visit, and I think it's currently still happening, I'm assuming, the recent visit, the regime change, and the kind of organizing that's happening in Tamil Nadu, all these are collective concepts. So I'll start with Mr. Eelaventhan. You've been part of the Indian process a few times. So
in the sense, I have been in India for 20 years and twice deported. It's an honor for me. So we can know the inborn prejudice there. When we speak of India, we do not think of Tamil Nadu alone. We have to think of Delhi as a first thing. In Delhi, whatever regime, there's a south bloc. They dictate terms to whoever in power. And in the, I am not using any harsh term, the Delhi thinking either is Hindi, Hindu and Hindustan. Some may openly express it, some may not openly say it, but the thinking is there. And I repeat, South Indian, South bloc counts a lot. But to me, a pleasant surprise which may not help us now, but for record purposes, 1983, August 19, when I met Indira Gandhi, among the many things he said, she used the word, she said, for the first time in the history I have used the word genocide is recorded in Parliament. Then she spoke about conditions in Sri Lanka and said, what do you think of Trincomalee? She asked me. I said, Trincomalee is a power to be recognized, is a country and can dictate terms of it. So I am not kind of give you lessons on Trincomalee. No, I am interested in Trincomalee. So when you get to, she put it in a smile, what will be the person? I said, you will have a share in Trincomalee thinking, I said. Right. Then when she
so you basically negotiated Trincomalee with Indira Gandhi without us knowing, eh?
And then she said, Madam, you know JR is anti-India.
Yeah.
He put a smile and said, anti-Indira too.
Yeah. Let's come to the current context. I mean, history is important. Historically, you know, Congress and the relationship with Indira Gandhi, MGR, and other things are
here
grounded.
I didn't come into Tamil Nadu. That's equally interseparably linked. 1988, when the issue cropped up, Mr. C. N. Annadura made a very interesting statement. He said, when Krishna Menon interviewed and said, you are interfering in a country which is our neighbor and that and this. So Mr. Annadura made it clear and said, if I see my neighbor hugging and kissing his wife, certainly I should not intervene. Yeah. But out of shyness, I look the other side. But under pretext the husband is trying to knife her to death and she cries in agony, am I to watch? And this is the plight of the Eelaventhan Tamils. Krishna Menon could not reply anything. 1958 this happened. Now, whether we like it, I said it earlier, 55,000 square miles, how many? 80 million. 80 million Tamils.
70.
70. What? So they can definitely create an impact in Delhi.
Let's talk a bit about the current situation as well. And I think the history is very important because again, that's what informs. Both the Indian political parties is informed by their previous histories, but also how we interact. But what's going on currently, and how does it?
We look up to India as our guardian, you know, and we look up to India to deliver the goods for us. You know, observing Mr. Modi's visit, Prime Minister Modi's visit, he addressed Parliament and. He congratulated Sri Lanka for eradicating terrorism, and that's how he started his speech. We don't call it a fight against terror. We call it genocide of the Tamils. So, well, and his speech mainly consisted of boosting Sri Lanka and talking about trade, tourism, strategic interests, like setting up, you know, business in Trincomalee and so on. Trincomalee being a strategic location, maybe India wants to, you know, have a foothold there, which is a good thing. And he also made very subtle hints about the going beyond the 13th Amendment. Of course, you know, I think India has to now realize realize the fact that the Tamils, whether the diaspora or those living in the north and east, want something more than the 13th Amendment. They are looking to a federal arrangement, actually. And so that is what Mr. Jegatheeswaran meant by dynamic power sharing. So sometimes I thought that Mr. Modi was using the subtle, using some subtle language, actually, but I didn't see him actually sort of setting deadlines for reforms, which was very disappointing. No compunction at all. So, in that sense, whereas Mr. Cameron, David Cameron said, in 6 months' time, the spotlight will be back on Sri Lanka, whereas Mr. Modi wasn't saying the things that we wanted him to say, but we are still hopeful that finally, we are hoping he will deliver the goods.
So we have to talk a bit about diaspora role as well, but quick comment around, there is a bit of a feeling among some of us that the Tamil leadership is trying to negotiate with center India without taking in the biggest strength that we have, that Tamil Nadu population, right?
Yes.
Is that a wrong path to go? Is it a strategic path to go? Because I feel like that's been our strength, and trying to not value the strength and to negotiate this with the center is, it doesn't seem politically strategic to me, but I don't know where it's coming from. Is there any other reason?
The Tamil Nadu Legislative Assembly had passed so many resolutions, and they are with us. And the Indian central government, though it recognizes it, doesn't, in fact, in Mr. Modi's speech today, he says he brings greetings from 1.25 billion billion friends, he calls friends, and also millions of cricket fans. Now, little did he say that, here we have the Legislative Assembly in Tamil Nadu passing resolutions condemning Sri Lanka, and so I'm not sure whether they are looking to Sri Lanka as friends. So in that sense, yes, I think the center is virtually ignoring the sentiments of the Tamil Nadu
Well, the
people.
center ignoring is been traditional.
Yes.
But Tamil leadership from diaspora as well as Tamil leadership from Eelam trying to not pay attention to the Tamils in Tamil Nadu is a bit of a worry. So let's quickly have a conversation around human rights advocacy in India. Right? We talked about political solution, but human rights advocacy in India, in UN and other places is a critical thing, right? So if you can briefly touch on that, and we'll go to diaspora roles.
So I think India's relationship with respect to this has always been a bit contentious. Like, we want to place faith in India, we want to hope, given that their status as a regional power, given the position of Tamil Nadu in India, that they'll support the cause of Tamil rights. But I think what we've seen in Geneva and other forums, and at the Human Rights Council, is that India is as much subject to the geopolitical forces around it as other countries are. And I think we have to be conscious of that. And I think what we have to be careful about is, while we do and should structure advocacy around getting India on board and using India's power, we shouldn't frame our demands in a way that meets India's aspirations if that doesn't match up with what we actually want. And I think that's something we have to be very careful about. And the relationship between India and Tamil rights will always be complicated, and I think that it constantly needs reevaluation. But I do think that advocacy to India plays an important role, whether it's advocacy to the central government or advocacy to Tamil Nadu.
Okay. So we have only 5 minutes left. We want to talk about, I think we will come back to another show to talk more about diaspora role. But let's quickly get a sense of what should our organization, what should the diaspora be focusing on for the next couple of years?
So So I think that what the diaspora should be focusing on is what we have already been focusing on, which is propping up and supporting the demand for Tamil rights in Sri Lanka, and using our power and privilege as the diaspora to articulate that demand in other spaces. So whether that's ensuring that international pressure remains on Sri Lanka and continues to intensify, or whether that's addressing human rights issues in Sri Lanka through our own conversations and bilateral discussions between governments and with our own government, I think that's sort of where I see the diaspora's role. I also would love to see an expansion of the diaspora's role with respect to development in the Northeast, because right now that space, as much as the political space in Sri Lanka hasn't opened up under the new regime, I do think there's a sliver of an opportunity with respect to development, and I think the diaspora could play a critical role in marrying the two there.
Okay, great.
Yes, I agree with Dharsha on those, developing side of things, definitely. But the TGTE, for the next year or so, couple of years, its program consists of two things, two major issues. One is to push for a referendum on an independent and sovereign Tamil Eelam, and the other one is to obtain justice for our people, for the victims of genocide, and to litigate genocide, in fact. So those are the two that we would be
that
working
talks
on.
about getting
And
justice for the past.
Yes, and I have to tell you that we are working on an ongoing basis. We don't just go there in March. We have a resident member lobbying for us continuously, Sugindhan. Then we have a French-speaking deputy Minister for International Relations, who actually appeals to the French-speaking people on an ongoing basis, and then our intention is to mobilize the diaspora, the people power behind the diaspora. That is that is what we want to do, and definitely our Minister for International Relations and our Prime Minister, Mr. Viswanathan Rudrakumaran, is continuously engaging members of the diplomatic corps and giving interviews, releasing statements, and so we are working. Yes, we are working very hard. I
because
would say
we cannot be event based, right?
Yes,
we have to be doing
yes, we are on an ongoing basis, and within the limitations.
I think to what she said, because the time is there, urging the United Nations to refer the perpetrators and the alleged perpetrators of genocide, crimes against humanity and war crimes committed against Tamils on the island Sri Lanka. We are carrying on a 1 million signature as requested by Mr. Rudrakumar. This is, you said, what are we doing or what are we going to do? We mean action. We're not confining to words. We were translating into action what we could. Maybe we are not anything superpowers, but certainly it will have its impact when people get involved in it.
I think that's generally the interest why people are involved in this, to make sure that we get both the justice for what has happened for the people who are victimized, but also have a political solution that would prevent this from repeating, that's sustainable, that's respectful. So thank you very much for the three of you for taking the time to come. I know these are huge topics that we rushed into few minutes, but because of your expertise and the experience doing this work, we were able to gather the most important highlights of those discussions. So Dharsha Jegatheeswaran, thank you very much for joining, and Usha Sriskandarajah.
I want to thank on behalf of the TGT for the wonderful opportunity of sharing thoughts covering 3 generations. Thank you again.
Yes.
And I'm pleased to have a 2/3 woman panel talking about this issue, because this is a change we need in the diaspora in terms of leadership as to how we engage women in towards the solution that we are proposing. Thank you very much.
Thank
thank you very much, Neethan.
Thank you. Thank you, viewers, for watching CrossRoads with Neethan Shan. We had a deep discussion on the human rights situation and political situation in Sri Lanka as it relates to Geneva, India, and many other places. So in a week, we'll meet you with another topic. Thank you.